Let's talk about sprint review meeting. How does Scrum Master comes and facilitate this sprint review meeting?
Yeah. So first, let's talk about what a sprint review is. Sprint review really is a more of an informal event that happens end of the sprint and is really to showcase what the team has done over this sprint, really the product increment, what did they create? And that is to showcase to stakeholders, sometimes users if available, and really foster that collaboration, get feedback, and create transparency more than anything. Mm-hmm. And so the Scrum Master does facilitate this event. A lot of times the product owner will also take a lead to show or really talk about what was committed during the sprint. And so some of the agenda item that we might think about would be talking about the sprint goal. What did the team commit to? What were maybe some of the roadblocks, impediments? What kind of problem and challenges that the team ran into? Mm-hmm. And then from there, the team will maybe showcase what they did. Like actually it's not a presentation, it's actually showcasing the work that they did. Yeah. And then from there, getting feedback from the stakeholders and users. And it maybe sometimes even identifying new features or new requirements that might come out of that. So documenting some of that. Mm-hmm. And then obviously like feedback on the product and the team and what they could do better to produce better results or better product increment. Yeah. And so usually if it's a 2-week sprint, it will last for about 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours. And all the stakeholders are invited. So you want to identify as a facilitator, as a Scrum Master, you want to be able to identify the right people that really need to be in the meeting. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like one anti-pattern a lot of times I see is stakeholders or some of the people that really need to be in the room not being identified. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing you want to do as a facilitator. I also like to encourage the team to do the demos. Sometimes I see, the product owner will walk through things. Yes, the product owner should talk about what was committed, what were the user stories, like going over each of the user stories that the team had committed to. Mm-hmm. But I like the team to showcase some of this stuff because they did the work. They should feel empowered to say, hey, here's what each of the user stories product increment looks like. Mm-hmm. And here are some of the challenges that we ran into. And here's how we figure some of the stuff out. Nice. And then as a Scrum Master, I think the biggest thing for a Scrum Master during this session, yes, like time boxing the event, making sure we have enough time to go through all of the agenda items. Apart from that, really making sure the stakeholders are providing feedback and input, because that's another anti-pattern I see sometimes. If the stakeholders and users are always like, oh yeah, everything looks good, then the team doesn't necessarily have a lot of opportunity to improve. And so just asking certain question where the team does get feedback from the stakeholders. Yeah. Because there's always things to improve. Yeah. Right. And so making sure that's happening and then just really documenting any new items that might come out of it. We might even at the end of the sprint review, we might even look at like, okay, what's kind of coming up, right? So because we've already gone through some refinements, so we kind of know what we're going to work on. So just kind of giving the glimpse of here's what the team might work on next sprint
to the stakeholders,
so they know what's kind of coming up. Mm-hmm. Maybe there are certain things that the stakeholders need to communicate to the business, to the users. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that there's a space for that also. Yeah. And after that, making sure again, like that feedback, what the team can do better, getting that feedback from the stakeholders and closing out the meetings. And as a facilitator, sometimes you might have to give, not meeting notes necessarily, but maybe like if there's a recording, if there's like a demo that was recorded that needs to be sent to certain people, maybe certain people weren't present, making sure that does happen. And then closing out the meeting would be a successful sprint review.
Yeah. Any anti-patterns or anything that you see, anything else that you see in the sprint review meeting?
I think sometimes talking about only the user stories that were done and not like kind of ignoring and not talking about like maybe what wasn't done, right? Because it's equally important to talk about those. And sometimes also depending how the user stories are written, are they vertical or horizontal? We think if it's a backend or more database story, it doesn't provide a value, but I think it's like, it does. And it's important, even though the stakeholders might not understand the technicality of it, just talking about it and saying, we needed to create this database or we needed to do this thing on the back end. And now because we have this, here is how it's going to help, right? A lot of times like stakeholders just would want to see what the product looks like.
Yeah.
But yes, that's important. But like also like quality is important. Yeah. So if we did any work on like refactoring, or any bug fixes, or certain use case or certain test cases that we wrote to make sure that we have a better quality product, I think that also should be communicated to the stakeholders. And the stakeholders should find that important as well, because at the end of the day, not only we want to have a product increment, but we want to have a quality product increment.
Yeah, no, that's nicely covered. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rita, let's chat about sprint retrospective. How does a Scrum Master show up for this meeting and how do they prepare? Kind of talk to us about sprint retrospective.
Yeah, sprint retrospective is a big deal for the team and also for Scrum Master, because that's one meeting that you solely are responsible. Other meetings can be facilitated or led. You facilitate, but they're very much led by the product owner also. And stand up, the team can also facilitate that meeting by themselves. But retrospective is definitely where the teams are inspecting and adapting on a few different things. How they did as a team. So the people side of it, process, tools, environments. And so as a Scrum Master, I definitely recommend using a couple hours prior, thinking through the sprint, how the team showed up, so that you can also add some value during it. Yes, like it is a meeting really designed where you unlock different perspective and different knowledge from the developers and the product owner also, obviously. But at the same time, you also can add a lot of value during this meeting. And so really thinking through, you don't want to say overly too much, but a few action items, a few things that you saw as a Scrum Master during this sprint that you can communicate to the team. Definitely keep that in mind. So preparing what method you want to use. I think that's a big thing, because if a Scrum Master always uses the same, like what went well, what didn't go well, what could we do better? Yes, the premise of retrospective is that, but there are so many different ways of conducting that. So you want to keep it spicy. You want to keep it fun and engaging. And so definitely research some things so that you can keep it fresh and keep alternating throughout. As you're conducting a retrospective, usually for a 2-week sprint, maybe an hour and a half, it's a good idea to do that. But apart from that, you want to select what method you would use. And as you're facilitating, I usually like to start with a check-in or even like an energizer, right? Because retrospectives are also meetings where sometimes the teams might find it difficult to like communicate. And you're going to have a lot of quiet team members also at times. And so the trick here is within the first few minutes of starting a retrospective, can you at least have everybody, even if it's one word, say something, right? So even simple as like describe the sprint in like an emoji or one word, just getting them going and starting to think and reflect definitely is a good idea. And one of the big thing that you want to make sure you create is like a safety container as a facilitator, very important. And when I say safety, is like using things like prime directive and making sure that the team feels that whatever is talked about really stays in the room, and that this is a safe environment where we're not here to blame anybody. We're not here to judge anybody. And literally the prime directive says that, hey, this is a safe environment and we all did best. The team did best to their ability and what they knew, what resources were really available to them during that time. So we want to talk on how we improve on these different things, but we're not here to blame anybody.
No.
And so really putting that up there, it's definitely important. Sometimes I also do like to show the progress on like, if we already have like established velocity, how they've changed over time. I think showing some sort of data and that gets them excited. I'd like to do that sometimes. But apart from that, really using the 5 steps of retrospective and keeping that in mind, no matter what method you use to conduct that. And so really setting a stage, whether that's a check-in, prime directive, what we're going to do, what we're going to use. And then from there, you want to, generate insight, and generating insight goes into like, okay, I might do what went well, or the STAR method, or like the sailboat, or 3 little pigs, whatever it is. And so you want to generate insight. Or no, that's gathering data. Yeah. So you want to gather data by using one of the methods. And then from there, and I give, a good amount of time to do that, maybe like 20 minutes or so, where the teams are, reflecting. Maybe you can even make it anonymous if people don't feel comfortable sharing some of that items out loud, using some sort of tool like a fun retrospective or any other method. There's plenty of templates out there. Yeah. Using that. And then apart from that, then we want to go into generating insights. So generating insights is, what are the bigger themes or pictures that we're seeing? In asking like more coaching questions, open-ended questions, like why did you think that it is the way it is? Or, how did you come to that? What did you see during the sprint that allowed you to say some of those things, or whatever that might be? And so doing that and talking about those, whatever the big themes are, let's talk about those. And then from there, you want to go into action items. So like kind of closing the meeting and deciding what to do. Well, we had all these things we identified. What do we want to do about these items? And then again, like you want to make sure you have action items out of that, which is like the 5th step, obviously. And other things like doing a retrospective that can kind of be visited, that I can talk about, would be revisiting some of the working agreements or definition of done, definition of ready, occasionally doing that. Also, it's a good idea. Sometimes like if I've seen certain patterns throughout the sprint, maybe I might want to do a little bit of a teaching too. Right? Putting that teacher hat. If I see the daily stand-up becoming very status-y, I might just like talk about it a little bit. So teaching a little bit, you don't always want to teach, but occasionally finding those. So it's really, really important as a Scrum Master to feel and see the pulses throughout the sprint. Because what if like the teams are just very disconnected during this sprint? If I see that, my retrospective might look very different. What I might do, right? I might even like give them a prompt question and maybe even put them on a breakout room and like just have them talk to each other. Create that trust, create that rapport versus like having to like, maybe it's not even about the sprint. It's so much about like how they're showing up with each other. And so a lot of times it's like, I know as a Scrum Master, like, okay, like I facilitate these events, but what do I do after? 50-60% of the time you absorb. You absorb these things, you absorb the patterns. And the things that they're doing. So then like you can really help them. You can be more effective on that. And so doing that, also making sure you're inviting the right people. It's important. So like maybe like dev managers should not be there. Like not maybe, like they shouldn't. And so
that violates the safety of the team.
Exactly.
Sometimes they.
And any of the stakeholders. So keeping it to the team, the cross-functional team, like really who's really involved in the different phase of the product, right? Like design, build, test, whatever.
Yeah.
So keeping people there, and then the product owner can definitely provide a lot of perspectives. I really recommend them to also come, and then you as a Scrum Master. So keeping that and making sure like we have action items, at least one or two, not overly too much. Again, if we have too many action items, are we going to work on the sprint or are we going to work on the action items, right? And so just having one or two and making sure those are maybe even part of the sprint so that we look at it, we see it, having it somewhere versus like we have the action item, but then
part of the sprint backlog.
Absolutely.
And sprint.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One question that I have is like, whenever I've conducted retrospective, things come up like the challenges or impediments that come up. Those are usually outside of the team's control. External things like facilitator, Scrum Master. How do you get teams to focus on things in like the team's control and things that we can actually
Yeah, I think it's important to remind the teams. A lot of times, like it's hard to look at ourselves. It's easy to blame other external factors, right?
Yeah.
Oh, if like our management was like that, or our leadership was that, or we had the right tool, or this and that. I think it's about creating those deeper relationship with the developers where you can really help them unlock that in a way that like, hey, yes, like there's all these different factors, but like what's really in our control? What are we afraid of?
Yeah.
What are we not saying?
Yeah.
And so if you establish a certain relationship and over time, again, you feel, well, just walked into a team, these are not some things that you might be able to help, but like as you're with the team over time, you can definitely help them on that in their growth so that they feel like, okay, there are some things that are not going to be in our control and let's not focus on that. But like, even if one or two things that we can improve as a team, that's a huge thing.
Yeah. So you're saying like build a relationship, build a connection. So then even if you, like when you challenge them, hey, like let's focus on items, then you have the connection before you correct them. So you're inviting them to look at those items that the teams might or we might be contributing to, and have access to solving those.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Anything you want to add?
No, thank you. Thank you. That was a great summary of like all 5 events. So hopefully that's going to be really helpful for the listeners.
Yeah. Yeah.